What's up, everybody? So today on this video I'm going to be showing you how to take this big old chunk of rough cut walnut I have here. It's about 6.5 feet long. Thing's huge. Oh. Anyway, and turn it into hopefully 2 more picture frames like this. That's my buddy right there. Anyway, a little backstory. I made this one for my mother just before Christmas, and just like any other guy, I waited till the last second to make it, so didn't really have time to film it. So I thought this would be a good opportunity to show y'all how I did it. So let's get started. So now it's time to start measuring the lengths of the cuts you need to make. So once you've already nipped off one end at a 45, you're going to want to measure out how far you need to go. In my case, I'm using an 8x10 mat size. I'm going to go ahead and do the 10-inch side right now. So you would think that you would just take a measurement from this point right here and go on out 10 inches. Well, that's really not the case. That would actually, if you went from here out 10 inches and made the cut on a line that you would see right there, that would actually be too long. What you need to do is come to this point right here on the inner wall of the rabbet and then measure out 10 inches. So you take it from there. I've already made a line right here, 10 inches. And I've actually added 1/8 of an inch just for a little bit of play. Then you're going to back up approximately 1/4 inch. In my case, I have roughly a 1/4 inch rabbet right here. Then make that mark, and then that's where you're actually going to make the cut. Transfer that line on around here to where you can see it. I'll go ahead and move the camera. All right, so now, I know it's really hard to see, but I have a line right there. You back that on up to where the blade's going to meet. Go ahead and put a clamp right there, or a block in a clamp, clamp that down, and you're ready to go. Now that all the pieces are cut up, it's time to glue them together. And the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to take two pieces like this, glue those together, do the same thing for the other two. Let those sit for probably 30-45 minutes, at which point in time they should be good enough to work with. Then we'll take those two halves, glue those together. Then I'll get them all taped up using as a clamp, let them sit overnight, and continue from there. So let's continue. Okay, so now that the separate halves have had time to dry just a little bit, I think it's been about 40 minutes, we're going to continue by going ahead and gluing up the two halves together. So now that these have had a chance to dry overnight, we're going to go ahead and get them unwrapped and then take them over to the table saw and use my spline cutting jig. Now, most of y'all already know, but for those who don't, this is basically an end grain to an end grain glue joint, which isn't really the strongest joint, especially when referring to glue, that there is. So that's the reason for adding splines, to add that rigidity or strength to the joint. So basically we're just going to cut some slots down each corner and then come back and add material. In my case, I'm just going to use some matching walnut. So off to the table saw we go. So here we are at the spline cutting jig. Now basically, for those of you who don't know, it holds the frame up against what we'll call a backer board on these support pieces right here. And what you want to do is set the height of your blade up a certain distance. I don't know if there's an exact science to this, so if anybody wants to comment on that, let me know down below. So anyway, set your height, and then eventually we're going to be setting the distance in this direction to cut halfway in the thickness of the frame. And then you're just going to cut basically slots through here on all four corners, and I'll be doing that on both frames. So here we go. So now that those are cut, I figured I'd point out a couple things here. For my project, I chose to use, put the thickness of these slots, the thickness of the blade that I'm using. And speaking of the blade, yes, I am using a regular cut blade, meaning it has an alternating tooth pattern. So ideally, you would want to use a flat cut blade that would produce a flatter cut right here. Now what that's going to mean is once you insert the spline material, you may see two little holes right there. Now yes, you can come back with the old trick of some glue and some sawdust and fill that in and pretty much hide it. I will go ahead and show you a close-up of my already completed frame, and I got to tell you, you can barely see it, and I didn't even use any filler on that. So for my purposes, it works out just fine. So next step is to go ahead and get the actual spline material cut. And for that, I'm going to use another piece of walnut I have laying around here. So what I'm going to do is resaw it on the table saw. The other option would be on the band saw, but I like this method. It just produces a smoother cut and less work afterwards sanding it down. So anyway, that's my preferred method. So I've already taken the time to take some careful measurements to where I will end up with just the right thickness to then insert into the picture frame. So we'll cut it this way, then we'll lay it down right here and cut the piece out. So what you just watched was me getting all the spline material glued in. Next process will be taking it over to the disc sander and getting it all sanded flush with the rest of the frame. At that point, lots and lots of sanding, which I won't bore you with too much, but I am going to sand it down to 220. Probably throw some water on here to raise the grain, sand it back down again, 220 again, and then the best part of all, finally being able to put some finish on it. So let's go.
Can't see my face, it's camouflage.
So I did have one joint that had a little bit of gap on there. Well, that's okay. So I'm going to go ahead and mix up some glue and sawdust and get that one filled in. All right, so we'll let that set up for just a little bit and we'll get sanding. Yes, sanding is over. At least for y'all, it went by like that. For me, it was basically 2 days. I mean, not 2 full days. But last night, which is actually what you just watched, I did sand it down to 220 and then wet it down with some water to raise the grain. You just have to take my word for it. I didn't get any footage of that. I came back this evening and sanded it back down to 220 and got everything, both sides. So it is ready to go. Oh, and of course, had to throw on my logo there. Couldn't resist. So anyway, it's time for the grand finale, so to speak. Be throwing on some stain. So be putting on some Danish oil, some dark walnut, because it is dark walnut after all. No, I'm just kidding. That's actually what I used for the previous frame. It's all I had laying around the shop. So obviously I'm gonna match it up this time. So here we go. Well, I see something that I don't know if y'all are going to be able to pick up or not. Right about there. Go figure, I had a bug land right in it. Oh well, I'm getting ready to wipe them down anyway. So, just got done with 2 coats, and I've let them sit for approximately 15 to 20 minutes. And it's time to wipe them down and see what they ultimately look like. And we're calling this one done. So just got done wiping these down from the final 2 coats of finish to put on here. I think they turned out pretty good. They did turn out quite a bit darker than the original, Both had 2 coats of the exact same finish, so not quite sure yet what's going on. Maybe they'll lighten up in the future. If anybody else has any ideas, let me know down below. So from this point, I'm not going to put any matting or pictures in them. I'm going to be giving them to my mother, and she's going to take care of that. So again, I'm done with it at this point. I'm just going to pass it on to her. So anyway, hope y'all have liked this video. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Hit that bell notification as well. And don't forget that like button. That's a good one right there. So we'll catch y'all in the next video. Bye-bye.